I think it's a fitting day to reflect on cycles of light, time, and change as we continue our fall 2025 lecture series. I'd like to thank our lecture committee, along with our Dean, Uwe Flukinger, who makes it possible to bring inspiring voices like Chris Warren to the Huckabee College of Architecture. This year's theme is immaterial, exploring architecture's ability to engage both the tangible, matter, gravity, tectonics, and the intangible, atmosphere, perception, memory, and cultural resonance. Each of our speakers this year, fall and spring, connect deeply with these dualities, inviting us to see the world with greater intention and to enrich our understanding of the built environment. It is therefore a pleasure to welcome our second speaker, Chris Warren, AIA. Chris is the founding principal and design director of Word, named a Design Vanguard by Architectural Record and an emerging talent by Monterey Design Conference. Chris has shaped award-winning projects that span scales and typologies, from large-scale urban districts to adaptive reuse and intimate community spaces. Before establishing Word, he was a design leader at Morphosis, I think I'm pronouncing that right, in Los Angeles, and has taught widely at USC in international programs such as Shanghai, Rome, and Como, which sounds like a really fantastic post, and a visiting professor of urban design at Washington University in St. Louis. Drawing on his multicultural background and personal experiences, including his family's direct impact on the recent California wildfires, Chris approaches architecture as a generative act, one with the capacity to heal, connect, and shape more resilient futures. After the lecture, we have time for some questions, so I encourage you to stay and join the discussion before we close promptly before the end of studio, so 4:45, 4:50. With that, please join me in welcoming Chris Warren.
Thanks, guys. Thank you to Peter and to Christy for the invitation. Thanks to Alex, Rachel, and Daniel for the hospitality. Purpose for me speaking to you today is really to explain my story. And through the examination of my experience and some selected projects that I'll show, emphasize my belief that the term resilience is actually going to be a key term that the industry will be building towards for the next generation. It's very similar to sustainability in that way, where sustainability has essentially become a necessity in everything we do for about the past quarter century. So when I began my architectural education, the term sustainability was actually rarely used. We did discuss things such as passive heating and cooling, but there is really no such thing as being carbon neutral at that point. But as you guys know, sustainability is essentially a mandate for architecture for every project. It's built into our codes, our laws, equipment and materials, and essentially our overall way of thinking. The wide use of the term resilience, however, is pretty much a new phenomenon. After all the devastating wildfires in Los Angeles, the catastrophic floods in central Texas, well-documented rise in extreme weather events, and the basically undeniable realization that climate change is upon us, it seems that this term resilience is essentially here to stay. And it's my belief that the next major ideological evolution in architecture will actually be based around this term. Just as sustainability went, it's probably going to start slowly. We'll start addressing it in things like building parts, materials, structure, but soon after that, it should emerge as something we build into everything we do. And as students and practitioners, I feel strongly that we are the ones that will be responsible for its implementation. So really quickly, what is resilience? Here are a couple of official definitions from UN Habitat and the AIA. To me, it basically boils down to resilience being something like the capacity to adapt in the face of adversity and threats and to emerge with greater strength and wisdom. For our profession, the threats to our well-being essentially exist in two forms, both societal and architectural. So on the societal side of things, those exist in a few categories like economics, public health and safety, and the socio-political realm. More specifically, they include things like recession, unemployment, pandemics, which we're all very familiar with, food and water insecurity, war and famine, et cetera. On the architectural side, it gets a little more specific, and we start looking at acts of nature or accidental or intentional threats. So some of those are things like hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, wildfires, um, sea level rise, rising temperatures, and then really simple things like building system failure, structural collapse, and even things that we don't like to talk about like terrorism or cyber attacks. So I particularly find these underlying portions to be the most important to remember. And really, UN Habitat also defines it as the potential to absorb, adapt, and recover from these threats, and then using resilience as a way to ensure development gains are not lost when shocks occur. That's really important, is that if we're taking all these steps forward after a disaster, we should not be in a place that's behind where we were before that. And we should be able to progress from that place. And then the AIA's definition is very similar. It's about bouncing back after a disaster, being durable, flexible, and prepared for evolving threats. So now that I've gotten the kind of boring stuff out of the way, I actually wanted to go in and tell you about how I arrived here as an architect. So as an educator, I like to present my experience as an architecture student, a worker, and then a teacher, just so you guys know that there's like so many paths to becoming an architect. There's so many paths to becoming an educator, if that's something you want to do. So really quickly, a little about me is I grew up in a very regular suburb of Denver, Colorado. I went to public high school. Straight after that, I went to state school, University of Colorado Boulder, where I got a 4-year undergrad architecture degree, which is called a Bachelor of Environmental Design. I started interning at an office in Denver. That office was a good business, but essentially did really uninteresting work. I moved on from there and went directly to grad school. So I did 4-year undergrad, followed it the next semester with 3 years of grad school at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. If you don't know, it's a school that's essentially based on or founded in the legacy of a modern master, which is Louis Kahn. I hope you guys know his work. If you don't, you should definitely look it up. Also interned there at a very large corporate firm that also did not do very interesting work. I then had no plans with my life. I thought, oh, maybe I'll move to New York. But I had a girlfriend at the time that was moving to Los Angeles. So I said, well, I don't have anything planned, so I'm just going to go to LA. 21 years later, we've been married for 21 years, have a 6-year-old son. And while I was working on my portfolio in LA, I got another job. This time it was at a one-man firm, and I was doing very uninteresting architecture. And this is with the foundation of a great education, great experience, et cetera. But as long as you persist, and I worked on my portfolio, I was lucky enough to land a job at a place called Morphosis. So Daniel knows this because he worked there as well. We weren't there at the same time, but it's a high design firm in LA, and I worked there for over 6 years. I joke that that's equivalent to working 12 years in any other firm. I was actually telling Daniel yesterday that I really remember that my first week, I worked 104 hours. Yeah, it wasn't like that all the time. I came in at a bad time, but it was not out of the ordinary. But at the same time, I was able to work side by side with Tom Main, who won the Pritzker Prize while I was there. And altogether, I was involved in working on and/or designing over 20 projects. So as things go, being an architect, an architecture student, a lot of you will invariably want to do your own thing. So I left Morphosis with a colleague, and we started an office called Studio Shift. Unfortunately, we founded this office in 2007, which was right before the economic downturn. So by 2009, the office was defunct. So luckily enough, probably because of my tenure at Morphosis, I was able to land a teaching job at University of Southern California. I ended up staying there for 6 years, teaching at WashU, and then going international, as Peter told you. But during this time, I also started my solo practice, which is the Warren Office for Research and Design, or WORD for short. And though the scale of this work was a complete shift from things I was working on at Morphosis, We've been fortunate enough to deliver some good projects. We've won a few awards. And the nice thing is we continue to be part of the architectural discourse in LA. So, while I was working in Morphosis, my wife and I fell in love with this little neighborhood called Sunset Mesa, which is off of the ocean, right on the border between Pacific Palisades and Malibu. So this was a home that was built in the 1960s. It was a little bungalow, was not remodeled at all, essentially untouched from the 1960s. But we loved it. And in this area, it's a development of about 500 homes, completely disconnected from the city. It's quiet, peaceful. We have beach access. And the only way in and out of it is to drive on PCH, or Pacific Coast Highway. And we lived there for about 14 years before we could do anything to the house. We could not afford anything. After saving up, we finally did a remodel. It became my first labor of love, and that was the Shore Heights residence. So this was taking that 1,800 square foot bungalow and essentially creating a full interior remodel, partial exterior remodel, and adding on to it about 600 square feet. For me, it was really an experiment in considering natural light as a building block of architecture, to see how it could come into a space and lend depth and kind of otherworldly or ethereal perceptions to a space. And the design was really based on the series of apertures that kind of led you through the home. And the nice thing was that the apertures would reflect the color of the sky and kind of modulate the space during the day. As you'll see, all the detailing in here was really minimal, and it was just so you wouldn't have trim or other materials to kind of take away from that experience. Budget-wise, there's also a reason for it. It's essentially all paint and drywall because that's all we could afford. Having that as your consideration or as part of the problem can actually be helpful in the long run. For those areas where we did have a little bit of room to experiment with materials, we did so. So this is actually an acid etched mirror. Again, it was all trying to enforce the feeling color changing throughout the day, the experience of depth that you can get in actually a very small space. And here's some more of the details. So while we were under construction, we had to relocate to Santa Monica, which is about 5 miles south of here. And in the fall of 2018, the Malibu Woolsey fire took place. So the Woolsey fire was, I think, the largest fire that's taken place in Los Angeles or Los Angeles County in recorded history. Luckily, we were already relocated, but the entire neighborhood was evacuated for about 3 days. So because this was still in construction after the fire, I made some changes to the house. We added some cement board cladding on the face instead of wood cladding. We added stucco under the eaves instead of letting them be bare wood joists or bare wood rafters on the eaves. We did little things like adding wire mesh behind the attic vents, and that's to protect embers that are on fire from flying into your attic and essentially burning your house from the inside out. And then we even applied cement board to a fence that was facing our neighbor down the hill. So we moved back in, and we've been living a very happy life, raising our kid in a house that we both loved. And that all essentially changed on the morning of January 7th. So I'm going to take you guys on a little journey through like a time-stamped photo and video collection that I was going through on my phone in preparation of this lecture. And turns out I have a pretty good timeline of the events of that day, at least for my neighborhood. So I was telling Daniel, so this is the first time I've ever presented any of these things in public. So like, I'm going to do my best to keep it together. But anyway, I can tell you, like, it was without doubt the most stressful day of my entire life. So this is the morning, and you'll see the timestamps on the bottom. This is the morning of the day of the 7th. And my wife shot this video. And the funny thing is, she showed it to me. We were both lucky enough to be working from home that day. So she showed it to me. I was like, not a big deal. We've seen probably 4 fires of this size and nature before, and we've been evacuated before. It's always been put out. It's usually never caused property damage. It's located in the forest and the hills, and it gets taken care of. So I said, and she said, no, we have to pack. We gotta go. And I was like, no, 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 no. This is nothing. That same fire had actually, burned in that exact same location on January 1st. So just 6 days previous, it was put out within a few hours. So I was sure we were safe. Strangely enough, there was a fire in Malibu on December 10th. So just a month previous to that, which did property damage up in Malibu. And to have 3 fire events that close to one another is pretty unprecedented. It was not a normal thing. We've been living there for 20 years and had never experienced anything like that. So, I went out a few minutes later, saw this, still not worried. I'm like, let's just go back in and work. Came out a few minutes later, noticed the wind was really kicking up. So this was within, 45 minutes of noticing the flames. And this fire right now is probably 2 miles as the crow flies away from our house. So while it looks pretty close, it's actually fairly far away. And then just a few minutes later, I notice it's getting bigger. And then I go to the front yard and I said, okay, you were right. We have to pack, like, let's get out of here. So again, this is 15 minutes later and it's like taking over. And then suddenly you see the water tanker planes start flying in, and you know there's a problem. So these planes essentially drive to the Pacific or fly to the Pacific Ocean, and out in the Pacific Ocean, they scoop up water as they're flying, come back, dump it on the fire, go back and forth. They can go back and forth. I mean, I've heard them not go nonstop for days before, or hear helicopters that are dropping flame retardant, again, nonstop for days in fires previous to this. So once we saw the tanker, we knew was kind of an issue. Just so you know, I'm leaving the volume on a lot of these slides just so you can kind of get the sense of how windy it really started becoming. It's still not that bad, but you'll see that it kicks up pretty soon. And of course, anytime there's a fire, you start getting texts from all your friends, whether they're in LA or across the country because it's on the news. So this was at the time my friend in Venice, which is about 7.5 miles down the coast, sent me this picture. And you can see the smoke is actually going out at a very low angle, which is indicating the winds are very strong. And from this angle, it was even larger than I thought it was. And 11:57, I'm taking this picture as I'm driving down the street, evacuating our neighborhood. So I had a few friends in the neighborhood that actually stayed back for a little while, and they kept documenting through videos and photos, and we were sharing everything through a text group. So what you'll see from this point on is essentially pictures that I was being sent from them, most of them from my friend Jeff.
Wow, man, 10 years, I've never seen anything like this here. Whoa.
So you say he's been there 10 years and never seen anything like this. And this is a view down his street. Of course, everything's going so fast, so I take a photo on my phone, try and write to show my parents, like, hey, this is where our house is in comparison to these flames. And at this point, we had been evacuated for a couple of hours to our friend's house in West Los Angeles. So we're there, and the only thing I'm doing is going through all social media that I can find to see what's going on, to see if there's any indication of, how the fire is being handled, and if we're going to go back to our house, go back to our house anytime. And then this photo came up. This was literally the first structure that I saw on fire in this for the Palisades fire. And then I looked a little closer. And I said, why does that house look familiar? And it was actually friends of ours in the Pacific Palisades. So this was one of the photos that went out as the first structure fire being burned. It was all across Twitter. So my friends in Denver had already seen this. My friends in Northern California had already seen this. And I had the luxury of calling my friend whose house it is just to verify that he knew. Luckily, he already knew. So they were resigned to the fact that their house was gone. So again, this is only, less than 4 hours after the fire started. This is the same vantage point that I showed a few slides ago from my friend Jeff. And then you see the actual tabulations start coming out. So in under 4 hours, that fire, which I thought was going to be minimal and be put out within no time, had spread through very rough terrain to over 772 acres.
Guys, the mesa's on fire. I'm out. See you guys.
So he said the mesa's on fire. So that's Sunset Mesa is what he's talking about. And at this point, Jeff leaves a little later than he should have. But then he continues documenting it from down the road, which you'll see. So this is Pacific Coast Highway at the base of our neighborhood. The fire is essentially at the entrance to the Getty Villa, which is a really well-known museum of antiquities in LA. And then in the next slide, you'll see another view of the base of the hill, and flying embers have caught the hillside on fire. The wind wasn't actually that bad down on PCH, but I want you to just look at the top edge of the flames and see how fast this thing is moving, even when it's not started by wind. So this one's going right up to the base of houses on the outer street of the neighborhood. So Jeff continued down north on PCH. This is a place called Topanga Beach, and kind of looking back, everything you see on top of that plateau is our mesa. Just recognize this blue sign and then the hillside behind it, because it'll come up in other photos as kind of a reference point. So at the same time, I'm still checking our doorbell cam for signs of anything I can find. And this was the first time that we had any indication that there was even a fire in the neighborhood. So strangely enough, all of that's burning. But if you looked out the front door of our house, you would never know it until this came up, and you can see the smoke in the upper right corner. At the same time, this is the view from down on Topanga Beach. And the next slide I'm going to show is it's funny. Like if you're in LA and you surf, which I don't, you're basically die hard. It's not to show the surfers, but just watch the tops of the waves and you can kind of see what the wind is doing. So if you remember that sign in the hillside looking back, this is what it looked like just a little while later. Okay, this is where it gets interesting, or even more interesting for me. Yeah, this is me texting a friend of a picture from my doorbell cam. At this point, the house across the street is its backyard is fully on fire. A few minutes later, my front yard is on fire. And then you can see another house up the street starts flaming up as well. And then the great thing, this is 416, 417, doorbell cam goes out. So at this point, I essentially have no way of checking on the condition of my house. We had a Nest smoke detector with a battery backup. It stayed on for a little while and had the little green light. So we're just like, okay, well, we're still okay. But then all of the power to the neighborhood cut out. So that was down. Internet cut out. That was down. And we had absolutely no idea of what was going on to our house or anyone else's. So the next slide I'm going to show you is, I don't know who this is, but it was shared through our text group. It's just people driving down from the base of our neighborhood. Again, they were in the area way later than they should have been. And but I want to show you this because on the left-hand side, you'll see a car on fire. The car was on the ocean side. There is nothing to burn on that side except rocks and sand, but it's on fire. And this is from embers flying, a mile away, catching a car on fire. But then these people also talk about like the businesses that are being lost. You may see that sign that I pointed out in the previous slide as kind of a point. I'm sorry for some of the language used in this video. It's not me, but I think it's pertinent to show here.
We are coming up on Topanga. This is all burned through, I think.
Dude, we gotta get fucking down to Palm Beach.
Wiley's is on fire. Chalada's on fire. There's a fire here at Mastro's.
All right, so at this exact same time, you notice that there's still a bit of daylight. They're driving below the fire on PCH. This exact same time, someone was driving through my neighborhood, and this is what it looked like. They're still listening to their music. Yeah, it's weird how people can be so kind of cool and calm during something like that. Like, we got out 6 hours beforehand in a frantic manner, and this guy's just cruising. So, like I said, we're at my friend's house. I'm sitting at the kitchen counter for probably 8 hours straight, looking at every piece of data. And this comes out. It's basically a fire map that's sent out by CAL FIRE. That's the state or county run fire services. And essentially everything in yellow is what has burned. My house is right in the middle of that. So the next slide is, so at this point, we're assuming our house is gone, right? We're resigned to the fact our power went out, our front yard was on fire, all of our neighbors' houses were on fire, and now we have this map, our house is gone. Weirdly, we were sad about it, but because we evacuated before, we really had pretty much everything we needed. We had all photos we needed. We had all the documentation. So we exited. We're leaving back some artwork. We were leaving back something that I worked on for years, the house, and memories, of course. But it was also this weird feeling of like, okay, well, that happened. Like, we get to start over. I get a chance to fix all those details that weren't working in the house and like do it right. And it was just really strange. We were actually almost joking about it that night, but at the same time, we went to sleep and like woke up with just a sense of dread. So the next slide is our grocery store. This is about 4 miles away in the Palisades. We had no idea that the fire was actually moving that direction at the same time. Again, look at the wind speeds, in this case, inside the store. So the recorded winds in this fire, I should have mentioned earlier, I'm talking about the Palisades fire. We had a massive fire event in Los Angeles that day where there was another fire in the Pasadena area called the Eaton Fire. It wasn't quite as large. It essentially wiped out an entire district called Altadena. Um, I'm not going to touch upon that just because I don't have the information, but just know this was an event that has never happened before. Not only is one catastrophic event happening on one side of the city, they're happening on both sides of the city. And we're expecting a response to take care of this thing. And at some point you just realize there's absolutely nothing you can do. And then finally, I don't know who this crazy person is or why they were still there, but we got this video sent to us. So the wind speed at this point was between 60 to 80 miles an hour with gusts up to 100 miles an hour. So we're talking about hurricane or more than hurricane force winds. And they just get in their car and drive away like nothing happened. And then the final slide of this is kind of the fireman's reaction. I don't know if you'll be able to hear the audio, but it's kind of, this really sank us all when we shared it in the text. This, the firemen are driving on the street behind my street in this, and the last house you see is actually next door to a really good friend of mine.
Yep.
1107 Alpha into 98 back. Gonna go ahead and yeah, we lost 90 up here. Our top 118 are back up. Copy that. Confirming the lighter pressure. That's affirmative. 25 not all.
It's like this whole neighborhood's done. So sad.
All right, so that's when I went to sleep. And that's the end of the timeline for when the fire started. I will, a little later in the lecture, I'll show you some of the aftermath. But so now that I'm going to lighten it up quite a bit. Now that you've seen what's like kind of living through this catastrophic event, I'm going to take this and shift it back to architecture in light of some of the projects that we've completed over the years. And even though they were done before this term resilience was really in the forefront of our minds, I found that some of them do address a societal form of resilience. Some of them address material forms of resilience. And after we go through a few projects, I'll kind of bring you back and show you the aftermath. So this first one is called the Flower Street Development. It's a series of 2 projects. So these are explicit examples of small scale adaptive reuse. You can see the 2 sites. One was a small like walk-up cafe that was just derelict. The other one was a storage shed, which should have probably been torn down 20 years ago. But so in these 2 projects, the budgets were small. So really what we're trying to do is have an intervention that focused on programmatic and contextual means. And resilience in these cases, I think definitely lie more in the social or cultural realm. So on Flower Street in Glendale, Glendale is a little metro city a city within metropolitan Los Angeles. I have a client that's regenerating about 4 blocks, very slowly regenerating 4 blocks on this stretch called Flower Street. And if you were to drive down Flower Street before these projects were built, it's something you could have driven down 50 times and you wouldn't remember anything that you saw. It was completely nondescript place. So our goal was actually to start providing this neighborhood with some sort of identity or community identity. So in Little Ground Cafe, we transformed the corner by combining that failing walk-up lunch shack, which was adjoined to a bankrupt car wash, and we expanded the restaurant services to kind of try and start connecting people on a day-to-day basis. For this one, our budget was really tight, but so this ended up being a study in details of texture, transparency, materiality being really just wood and concrete, and just trying to kind of kick off some kind of neighborhood identity, a place that they could meet, a place that they could go and like share a coffee, because this type of thing just really did not exist previous to the project. And in so doing, we wanted to create a calm, inviting public space, which is this corner eating area. Um, and it's located in a place where there's literally hundreds, if not thousands of workers going into these entertainment studios, which are closed campuses. And they don't have a reason to come out because they have Starbucks, they have restaurants, et cetera. But many of them want an excuse to come out. They don't want to be stuck in their office place all day long. So my client saw an opportunity for this, which is why they started a cafe. And the nearest residential neighborhood is a minimum 5-minute walk from here. So there was no reason for people to come from the residential blocks to the street. But after, after we placed the cafe there with a nice outdoor eating area, it turns out that they did start doing it. And the eating area is kind of designed in a way that it's actually protecting people from like automobiles, the speed going by on the corner, noise, pollution, et cetera. And creating a gathering place. So here you can see a combination of cast in place concrete, which is the bench area along the bottom, and a patterned wood screen up top, which you can see through, but you still feel sheltered, kind of lends intimacy to a space while still connecting you with the street and sidewalk. And I firmly believe that, in architecture, people like to feel connected to anything, whether it's nature, other people, an architectural space. And inevitably for me, any successful project will have at least one space where there's a material quality or an architectural detail or something where people can connect to it on a more personal level. And I think this project is proof that even with a very small site, a restrained materials palette, you still have the potential for architectural creation. So the Flower Creative Office is really just 2 blocks down the same street. And here, for me, resilience isn't always about starting something new. It's sometimes about layering things over time in a contextual manner. And, taking something old and putting it in a place where it's there for the future. So I like to talk about this project as being unapologetically industrial and unique, but at the same time, completely at home in its context. And then the patterning on it, for me, people are driving by here on the street, probably going 55 miles an hour. It kind of reflects the idea of industry, of movement, speed, and also it's something that's bold enough that when you're driving by that fast, you might still see it, If it's a normal stucco building, you're not going to remember it, but this one you might remember. So in so doing, you might remember the neighborhood. You might remember that the neighborhood has some kind of identity. And the exterior here is actually very simple. It's made entirely out of 2 sizes of off-the-shelf standing seam metal. And it's just configured in a way that this graphic that's pretty subtle when you're there kind of goes over the roof and appears to slice through 2 windows. So in this project, it's really funny. We had really tight zoning constraints and the city was putting ridiculous mandates on us. We had to keep the building envelope, even though it was a tear down. And we actually had to keep most of the structure. So we repaired it almost in its entirety, even though the structure is from the 1930s and it was literally cut in half 40 years ago to widen the road. Still is historic enough that we had to keep it. So I think the best way for me to talk about this project, this and Little Ground both won California and LA AIA Design Awards, which we're very glad to have. But I like the description from the awards jury for this, so I'm just going to read it as I flip through some slides. With all the square meters built in our earth, architects must do more and more projects like this. A project that renovates a building that none would think could be useful and beautiful with a simple and clever intervention. A super thoughtful project that transforms this relatively low-cost building type. This boarding rewards you the more you look at it, and we imagine the pedestrian or vehicular experience is the same. This project embraces its context while also elevating it to another level. Okay, next, this is a project called Share Steps that we did in collaboration with Studio Skaggs Kennedy up in Berkeley. There's longtime collaborators of ours, and this is essentially what we call a model for a city. And this is an example of resiliency that can happen in both policy and economic strategy, not just architecture, and how architects can step out of traditional bounds to leverage those ideas. This is actually an international competition winning entry as of this June, which we're really happy to present. So the competition was called Small Lots, Big Impacts, in which the city of Los Angeles actually partnered with certain housing-based nonprofits and City Lab, which is a UCLA think tank in the School of Architecture of UCLA. And they created this competition. So the city currently owns over 2,300 vacant sites that might or might not be usable for housing development. And the city of LA currently has roughly 26,000 sites that are vacant, potentially available for housing development. So through the Small Lots program, the city is actually going to issue a dozen sites as a test case to developer architect teams to have a number of these built. And they're all multifamily and they're on a variety of scales. This one happens to be on the smallest scale, so it's like a typical residential city lot. In this case, that lot would maybe hold 2 or 3 residences. But in our entry, we leveraged governmental housing policies. There's these things called state Senate bills. So there's SB 1123, which is something new that allows the division of lots into smaller lots for sale. It doesn't have to all be under one owner. And there's another thing called a state assembly bill, so AB 1033, which in this competition, we were assuming it will be passed in early 2026. So that allows you to actually create ADUs. If you don't know what ADUs are, they're accessory dwelling units. In the past, an accessory dwelling unit could be built on your property, but it can only have one owner. I own the house and the ADU. If I sell anything, I have to sell both of them at the same time. Through this AB 1033, it actually allows you to separate those properties so that now you can have a separate owner of an ADU and a separate owner of the house. And through leveraging these, we could have up to 9 sellable units on a typical single residential lot. It was done by subdividing lots, creating units composed of the ADUs. In addition, there's something called a JADU, which was a junior ADU, which can also be sold. And, depending on how things go in 2026, this might actually come to fruition. And the economic side of things here is LA, the city of LA has actually agreed to set up a financing program for the developer architecture teams. Much of this is just unheard of. It's like first test case really for the nation, where when a developer buys the lot at market rate, the city will actually lend back $200,000 to the developer at a very, very low rate so that they can then pay the architect to find a design, pay the engineer to come up with a design. So you're having developers get in the development game that traditionally would not have been able to, and you're having architects who traditionally are smaller offices and would also not be in these development projects, kind of being propelled through it by the city. And then even after the sale, the city is going to have financing options for first-time owners that are low to middle income, where they also, because of these lots for sale, are giving buyback options at super low rates, which is the only way that some of these people will ever be able to afford a property in Los Angeles. This is also post-fire. So this is called the Embrace House and ADU. And this is, whereas the last one was a model for a city, this is actually, quote unquote, a model home for a post-disaster community. So this was meant to really do a simplified plan to focus on efficiency, affordability, adaptability, and design dignity. And it's been designed for a movement or an initiative called Case Study 2.0. So someone in LA brought together 40 architects to produce what are now standard plans for the Palisades fire rebuild. In this, the architects have all have an equal set fee that's way lower than normal. However, more than one person can buy a plan. So it really does become like a model standardized plan. In that case, the efficiency here lies in the fact that the design cost is reduced by a large factor. Planning and permitting, once it's permitted for the first time, the city of LA will do a fast track for anyone else using the design. So the first one gets a normal plan check and permit. The second one gets an automatic permit. The third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh ones get automatic permits. So you're essentially taking up to 3 to 6 months off of the timeline for someone developing a home. So this helps because people are displaced from their houses. They do not have money to live elsewhere. They are living on a rental budget, and they've never done a construction project before. Many of these people are underinsured or they're retired. They thought this was going to be their forever home, and now they're displaced. And then in this case too, we purposefully scaled down the building footprint so it's significantly smaller. It's about 700 square feet less than the maximum allowable. It's still in the Palisades, so it's a nicer. It's hard to compare Los Angeles to anything else, or especially the Pacific Palisades to anything else, because it was a very exclusive neighborhood, exclusive market. But this is still way smaller than what was typically there. And the houses that were there before were so close to one another that they had no backyards. They had no defensible space. So we made the compact footprint so that they would have a big backyard, have defensible space. And if they wanted to, could then put in an ADU, which we're also including as part of the project. And let's see. So unfortunately, while this is where the talks about resilience become a little tricky, because I'm all for doing this initiative. I think it's great because we're serving people that are potentially underserved, or they're not going to have an easy time getting back to their property. Unfortunately, I really don't think that these designs will change the fact that this area has a hazardous future. The real problem here is, at least in this neighborhood, that the distance from house to house, at best, pre-fire and post-fire, from my wall to my neighbor's wall is minimum 12 feet. And I can tell you that everyone is building to that minimum. No one's going to do an added side yard of 5 feet because, of the chance that it'll burn, because real estate is just so scarce. Pre-fire, many of the houses that had not been remodeled were separated from the house next to them by 8 feet. So the real culprit here is not that these houses weren't fireproof, is that the zoning was just inappropriate. And unfortunately, this is where those, not losing long-standing gains thing comes back into play. This is not something that's being addressed, and it honestly never will be, because the people here have too much money, too much power to say, oh yeah, just give away my house so we can have bigger lots. Because who's going to get the bigger lots? People with a lot of money. It's going to become an even more exclusive neighborhood. We're going to lose housing in the long run. So it's a catch-22. You want to be helpful, but at the same time, I'm trying to be really critical and saying, I don't really believe that that's the answer. Okay, so that's a few case studies on how we've dealt with resilience. I'm going to take you back to my experience, my personal story, and take you through what happened in the days after the fire. So the morning after, again, I think these people are crazy. There are a few people that stayed in the neighborhood all night. And they were in an area that didn't burn as badly because it was like a lower, they're calling it almost in a little canyon. But the next day they were driving around and almost cataloging the streets. So people that could not get back were seeing what was happening. Fire department and police had completely barricaded off the neighborhood. You could not get in for a 5-mile radius around here. You could not leave Santa Monica to drive up the coast, no matter who you were. Unless you were like me and my friend Oliver, who decided to walk on the beach, bypass any of the borders, try about 3 different e-bike types to figure out which ones were not geofenced, get on e-bike, because we were about 6.5 miles away at this point, take it up the coast until the geofence did kick in, and then walk the rest of the way. So this is part of our journey. It's still windy, as you can see. That's Ollie. Here's some of the things we saw. It's strikingly beautiful when the fire is actually going over the area because the sun turns this, orange glow. And as an architect, artist, you can start separating these things in your head. Like we were looking at the sun that day and going like, wow, that's really pretty. It's really unfortunate that doesn't happen on a different basis. The funny thing too is that we didn't plan well. So I'm walking and riding an e-bike up there. I have on a black shirt, black jeans, sunglasses, bandana over my face. What do I look like? I look like a looter. My friend Oliver is dressed the exact same way. We didn't plan it. And we're just walking down the coast. Not a single policeman, fireman, et cetera, even glanced at us. They were so worried about other things, right? Public safety, keeping people out of the area. If someone gets a little bit looted, they could care less. Right? So it was kind of funny that we're just walking down the coast doing this, but here's some of that. And this is me reporting back.
With Ollie. Good job. We're heading up towards Sunset Boulevard on PCH. We hear a bunch of popping, which may be propane tanks. And here's what it looks like.
So this is walking towards our neighborhood.
Sunset.
And the street and the beach was just completely desolate at that point. You couldn't really hear in that video, but there was this popping just happening every few seconds. And you could not tell what it was. It sounded like gunshots. And we talked to a fireman later. It was actually transformers exploding just all over the neighborhood. There's so many. They're just like going. It was really freaky. So even when we walked on the beach, there was enough ash and debris that the waves were kicking up gray sand. Fires were still burning. Power lines were down on fire. We happened to run into my friends in the neighborhood. So Jeff, the guy who sent me all the videos, is actually the guy in the forefront. He unfortunately lost his house, and he's on his way back after discovering that. So we get into the neighborhood. I see the first house of one of my friends that was lost. We go to the base of my street. I see the second house of my friends that was lost. And then we're at the street that basically tees into my street, and around the corner is my house. Keep in mind that our assumption is gone. And our next door neighbors are in their 70s, they're retired. They did not know what to do. If their house was gone, they had no options. So I sent them the following picture. And it's like nothing ever happened. They called me, later. I had no reception. They called me later. They're like, it looks like a real estate ad. Like, what is going on? What's going on? So you couldn't really see my house until you turn the corner. Again, I'm assuming it's gone. Luckily, it's still standing. As you can see, the front yard's completely burned out. The house next to me was caught on fire. I was looking down the other direction. All the trees that were newly planted are gone. The grass is green because it's fake. If you go down there, though, it's crazy. You see melted pieces of grass about this big, 6 inches in circumference, with a piece of charcoal basically sitting in it. So these embers were flying all over the place, and they would just land and just melt the grass. And then this is the backyard. Again, the entire side yard burned out. Somehow, I don't know how, our house didn't catch on fire. And then this is a view around from the back.
Just looking up the backyard on Shore Heights, downhill, Seth Street. Down to the base of Castle Rock and across the cliff.
And this is a view from inside of my house looking out to my neighbor. It's hard to tell here. The window's cracked. Her air conditioner is completely melted. There's stucco and paint basically peeling off the side of her garage. There used to be a 6-foot wood fence in between our houses. It completely burned. There was no trace of it left for 40 feet. My water heater on the side somehow boiled from the inside out. This plastic, some kind of plastic parts is ejecting out of the water heater. And even the vent pipe on the roof, it's hard to see here, but it is actually, it's bubbled because of the extreme heat. It's essentially boiling. So how my house did not catch on fire, I really don't know. This is my neighbor to the back. This is directly below us. This is my neighbor to the front, directly in front of us. These are the firefighters that were there all night long, saving my house. And these are just some very strange architectural details that you see when you're walking around the neighborhood. This was actually weeks after the fire. I didn't have time that day to go walking around. And then seeing cars burn out was absolutely fascinating to me. And this is the view from the neighbor behind me looking up towards my house and my neighbor's house, which had, my neighbor's house had 0 damage other than smoke damage, whereas in ours we have to fix a bunch of stuff. So conversely, this is Pacific Palisades. This is an area called the Alphabet Streets. The entire neighborhood was just wiped out except for a few houses. This is where we're doing the case study, standard plan designs. Sunset Boulevard is what I'm driving on the right, and it's just to the bottom of the picture on the left. And this is a view driving down PCH about 3 miles up the coast. You know, it's hard to explain like real estate values, but these houses were probably in the $12 million range, and every single one of them's gone. And then finally, not finally, but on the left photo, the very farthest left that you can go, my patio is just like barely sticking in there. And that's the street behind us. My friend Oliver's house, we were really lucky. Both of us, we did not know if our houses made it. He is at the very top of that street. There's one house that's still standing. That was his house. And then this view is a helicopter view that I think the county took of Sunset Mesa, our neighborhood. The one that teed into the front of my house is the street on the very top. There are over 40 houses on that street. Every single one of them, except the one on the very end, were destroyed. And that one on the end is unlivable. And this is a fire map. So everything in red was a complete loss. Everything that's not black was damaged to some extent, many of those unlivable. So again, somehow my house survived. It's both good fortune and in its own way, bad fortune. But with current discussions about resilience and fireproofing of homes, you know, all the architects in LA right now are just talking about materials and construction methods, and somehow that's going to be the magic shield to save us from future fire events. Like use concrete, stucco, metal, put in new doors and windows, don't design houses with eaves or attics, apply Class A fire, you know, Class A roofing. I can tell you from experience and from thinking about this every single day since it happened, that's really not the complete answer, because the only reason my house survived is because of luck. Honestly, there is no architectural feature that could have stopped that fire. I have a friend in Colorado who was going to build a house in the mountains, and he could not get insured. He said, well, I'm going to build it out of solid concrete. No, you can't get insured. The reason? Wildfires burn so hot that even though your structure is not burning, items inside your house will spontaneously combust and burn it from the inside out. So they're just completely uninsurable. My house essentially did not burn because the houses next to it didn't burn. It didn't burn because the wind patterns on that particular part of my street were different than wind patterns in the other streets. It didn't burn because my house is also significantly lower than the house next to it, because heat rises after all. And my neighbor's house didn't burn because he was lower than us, but also because I put in this cement board fence. You see that there's some damage. The only reason that big hole is taken out is because the wood posts, of course, caught on fire. And the only way they could put it out was to sawzall my fence so that they could get back there. Because not thinking when I left all the gates locked because I was scared of looters. Not thinking, oh, I could leave them open and someone could come and save my house. So, but the real reason my house did not burn down is because of these guys. So I had the pleasure of meeting them the day that we snuck back to the neighborhood. I actually woke them up in their fire truck. They were not happy. There's 5 of them all sleeping because my garage door was stuck. I had opened it and we could not get it down because things had warped. And I'm sitting there like going crazy because the fire's still burning. Ash is flying everywhere and I cannot get my garage door down. I have a sledgehammer banging while my friend, who's my size, is literally hanging on the garage door and we cannot get it to budge. So it was my pleasure to go wake up 5 tired firemen and say, hey, can you help me get my garage door down? They were really grumpy in the beginning, but they became great. But these guys, my house survived because these guys drove up and down my street for 14 hours straight and basically kept putting out spot fires for 12 houses that were left, mine being one of them. So all in all, my feelings about LA, their immediate response post-fire was I was actually impressed. The city and county, this is 2 weeks after the fire. City and county immediately sent in thousands of workers and volunteers. They fixed infrastructure. You can see these metal poles on the side. They were erected by the power companies within a week and a half of the fire, just so the grid wasn't completely lost. They had hundreds of police, hundreds of firefighters, and when they didn't have enough, they brought in the National Guard. You can see some of the troop buses on the left, and then all the National Guard vehicles lined on the side of the highway. There were hundreds of police vehicles stationed in beach parking lots, and there were army barracks stationed in beach parking lots. And then the next step is that FEMA came in. So this is a view from my backyard and then my front yard, left and right. And they, in conjunction with private and public utilities, came into the neighborhoods. They set up help centers in Los Angeles where you could go as a one-stop shop and get anything done. You could get your driver's license back that you lost. You could get your passport back that was burned. You could get your house deed back, like on and on. And then FEMA and SBA actually started assisting with funding immediately for those thousands and thousands of people that had no options for living. And then FEMA and the Army Corps of Engineers started coming into the neighborhoods and clearing lots at no expense to homeowners. They would actually bill your insurance company. Let's say you had $5,000 for lot coverage or for lot clearance, they would take $5,000. If you had $40,000, they'd take $40,000. If you had zero, they'd take zero. But it was all through the insurer. It didn't bother the homeowner at all, and it was all already paid for. They were clearing these lots because we tested it. In my lot, we had 200 times the amount of allowable lead, copper, chromium, arsenic, asbestos, it goes on and on. Luckily, interior, we were better, not okay, but better, mostly because we had remodeled and we had new doors and windows. So all of the good grades in the city, county was refreshing. However, leading up to the fire, there was a severe lack of preparation, resource allocation, and just due diligence on their part, such as emergency water reservoirs were discovered to have been lower than expected. The current city government that summer had initiated large cuts to the fire department budget. There was just an absolutely reprehensible lack of coordination between entities. The police would be reporting one thing during the fire department would be reporting another thing. They were not connecting in their communications, and it turned into a mess, which is why this got part of the reason why it got out of control as fast as it did and wasn't contained as fast as it needed to be. And all of that only magnified basically the glaring lack of preemptive measures that were put in place. So this is an aerial view. To put this in perspective, on the coast, from one end to the other, that's nearly 8 miles. It's hard to tell from this, but this is a map of Los Angeles. That little red dot is my neighborhood, Shore Heights Mesa. Sunset Mesa. And then this is the outline of the fire. To put it into perspective for you guys, here's Lubbock, and here's the outline of the fire. So here's some stats on the fires, the Woolsey fire before this event, and then the Palisades fire, and then the two combined. So the sheer amount of structures and area burning within the city's limits was, as I said, insurmountable. After the fire, a lot of people complained about hydrants not functioning. Well, I happened to be at an event where I was able to speak with the LA County Fire Chief, and he explained because fire sprinklers were code, everyone in the neighborhood had to have fire sprinklers. Those fire sprinkler lines in residences are built out of PVC. So when the top houses that are the first to be hit by the fire get hit, their PVC lines melt, and all of that water pressure is just leaking out of a pipe, not energizing sprinklers, but leaking out of a pipe into the house. The second fire hit, or the second house gets hit, same thing. By the time a few more houses get hit, there's zero pressure left at any fire hydrant. So now we're dealing with the consequences of thousands of people that were underinsured or not insured. As a side note, our carrier in November dropped us from their insurance plan. We were lucky enough in time to get insured by the state of California's plan because they said it's unfair to residents that every insurer is dropping out of covering anyone in California because of the threat of wildfire. Well, it turns out 1 month later, State Farm, who I hate, it was kind of right to have done that. But so, luckily we found insurance through California. Unluckily, they're severely underperforming with basically everyone, especially those of us whose houses remained. And so in conclusion, just want to wrap this up. So as architects, we need to keep resilient strategies in the forefront of our minds moving forward. We may feel like we're a small piece in the puzzle, but our industry, the construction and engineering industry, has much greater combined power than you guys may think. So we, as students, teachers, professionals, have to be proponents of resilience at all scales of architectural influence. At the least, we need to implement simple building strategies such as structure protection, better site design, materiality, et cetera. But our design should also spur things like community involvement, which in turn bolsters cultural activation and helps to support or define neighborhood identity. As well as working within contextual means, we should always be looking to the future, not always replicating things that were historic, and really concentrating on making projects that reuse something that's already there or that can be repurposed in the future. We must influence or initiate building policies. We may be the only people that are really going to try to do that for a few years moving forward. And in so doing, we can also leverage the government, we can leverage real estate entities, and we can initiate strategies for development that affect our cities. And we need to think intelligently about the economics of our industry and address issues of things such as wealth disparity, social stratification, and do that by producing work that's scalable, affordable, and dignified. Thank you.
Yes, question here. Thank you.
Oh. I remember you mentioning how you worked at a architecture firm for like 100 hours a week. What was the name of that firm?
It's called Morphosis. They're Pritzker winning firm in LA. Yeah, it's not necessarily like that anymore. Those are the old days. Yeah.
So I know you said that a lot of those like resilience tactics are not enough, but have any of them been implemented into legislation and to code?
So no, they're trying, and it's the resilient tactics actually I think are enough in most cases, right? So if you're talking about just building fire, a one-off, those things absolutely help, or even two houses next to one another. The things they don't help is when there's, burning embers flying 3 miles in the air. Like that's essentially unstoppable. The only thing that would have helped in that case is actually spacing buildings farther apart. But no, those do help definitely for just fire in general terms. There are some motions to, bring those into the code. The problem is also as we go on, like just the building industry, everything gets more stringent, and we become more like permit, expediters than we become designers at some point, because it's like we have to have paperwork for every single thing. But in terms of life safety, I'm all for it. But you know, there's always a catch-22. Just need to be critical about it.
Yeah, you mostly spoke about fires, but you know, obviously we're having crazy events happening, you know, hurricanes.
Oh yeah,
flooding,
hurricanes, floods, flooding,
wildfire.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the you know the criteria on how to protect against any of those is obviously very different. So the only thing that I can speak about at this point is wildfire, but it'd be interesting like to see what some of the design strategies are for flooding, et cetera. I mean, for as long as anyone can remember, the strategy to avoid flooding is to not build there, right? And it's really simple. Like as an idea, it's don't build there. You'll never get affected by a flood. Unfortunately, the market, you know, says otherwise.
Chris, thank you. Thank you for sharing actually this first person, I mean, in a kind of arena of a number of people sharing your first person experience with the fire. Having grown up in California myself personally, I'm quite aware of kind of the emergency complex conditions that play out with fires and this fire season for California. I think I just wanted to circle back to a couple of points you brought up because my understanding too now is that architects are in a position, not just architects, but have an opportunity to reimagine the impact of fire within a built environment. And you talked about, you touched upon how items in a home
Mhm.
play a really significant role in propelling fires within structures, so that the fact recently, right, we're in a high petroleum scenario where the products we're introducing in our homes are primarily made of plastics and primarily made of these like foams and combustible items. So there's kind of a fuel source that totally changes in the house. And then also you touched upon how the homes, like this idea of wildfires moving through home structure. So the wildland urban interface is not just a matter of like people building out in wild areas, but now like starting to see how boundaries and our urban environments or built environments are being more susceptible and falling under this category of wildland urban interface.
Yeah.
I'm just curious. I mean, those things resonated with me as you were talking about it and bringing up your own experience. And it seems like that need for architects to reimagine how fire is a really active part of our built environment now.
Yeah, we
as
all, I
well.
mean, it's crazy. We always take it for granted. And I'd been there since 2004 and nothing had even, we had a couple of things come close, but again, they were put out in no time. And it was even during like a Santa Ana high wind event. For whatever reason, you know, the wind wasn't blowing a certain direction, so they were able to attack it. But you know, that was 21 years of living there and feeling like we were completely safe. If the day before the fire, if someone said, I'll bet you $1 million that the Palisades, that area I showed, will catch on fire one day, I would have put $1 million bet down. There was no way in my mind that I thought that area would ever have burned. It was actually fairly well protected. It was, you know, also so luxurious or exclusive that, you know, you assume the fire department is that's going to be their first stop, and it was just unstoppable. But you know, with the also when you're talking about like petroleum-based items in the home, things like that, I mean the toxins that were released in this fire are completely different and way more dangerous than the toxins that would have been released 40 years ago. Because you have computers burning, you know, you have all these things that have chromium and lead and arsenic burning that we didn't have in our homes or in our cars. Tesla batteries popping and burning everywhere. I can't tell you how many like pools of aluminum I saw on the pavement because Tesla frames had melted. I mean, it's just it's insane. It's a completely different framework to like approach these things, and we honestly we haven't wrapped our head around it and didn't even think about doing so until this happened. So I just hope that there's not a setback or that yeah, I have a feeling like market conditions are going to jump the gun. They already have, and like everyone's tagline is "build it back." And it's like, well, no, we might actually want to think about this a little bit longer, but it's not going to happen, unfortunately.
Yeah, thank you so much. Also, like this region is actually also susceptible to pretty extreme fires.
Oh, yeah.
We usually like there have been cases up closer to Amarillo, so it's not too remote.
Yeah.
Although we're not adjacent to any large body of water, we still, yeah, have issues of fire here.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful talk. I'm just curious. I'm thinking about, the things that, you were so excited about with your house when you built it, when you designed it and built it, things like the light and the details. And I'm curious, going back to the house after the fire, are your design priorities the same? Like, would you design that house? I mean, you mentioned some details that never worked out the way you thought they would.
Right.
But I mean,
Yeah, other than those,
having lived through this sort of horrific
right,
thing,
because there's a lot of skylights in there, and one ember or something breaching, a sensitive area would have made a difference in whether my house was still there or not. Honestly, I haven't given it that much thought until just now, so I'm gonna have to rethink it. But yeah, I mean, yeah, when we move back in there, for sure, I'm gonna rethink everything. I mean, we're staying out. My neighbors in the photo looked like it was a real estate ad. They already moved back in. So, but they also say, look, we're in our 70s. We don't have a 6-year-old. We would not move in if we had the child, right? Because what we're looking at now is 3 to 8 years of construction activity, building 400 homes in a very small neighborhood, and we have one street in and out. So you can imagine just the amount of construction traffic at the end of any given day, like getting in and out of the neighborhood. And even though Army Corps of Engineers scraped all the sites and they're supposed to scrape like at least 3 inches of soil off, they did it in the footprint of the house. They didn't do it in that 5 feet that's adjacent to the fence or on the fence line. Like the fences are still there, pool foundations are still there, all the driveways are still there. So there's lead and asbestos and all of that is definitely still there. And once construction really commences, like we're worried about what's going to happen to air quality. I mean, air quality even in Santa Monica, weeks after the fire, was still showing higher levels of toxins, and that was just from wind blowing. So the Santa Anas is an annual wind event that goes anywhere from like October to January. It's when the air in the desert really heats up and then pushes it all out to the coast. But every year we get 80-mile-an-hour winds, and it's always like that one transformer that blows and starts something, and then the wind just takes it from there. But no, yeah, I think I'm gonna look at all those details. If not, luckily they're glass skylights, they're not plastic, so they shouldn't burn too readily. But the transitions from the roof to the frame, things like that, I think we can definitely beef it up. But yeah.
Sorry.
If that's all right.
I don't really believe in luck. Like it's
Really?
preparation. Well, it's preparation and opportunity, like the two things that kind of go together well. I guess after these fires, have you heard any discussions from architects and engineers about how like they're possibly going to rework how they do designs within housing and stuff
Yeah,
like
so
that?
I mean, in my neighborhood in particular, there's a movement of a couple architects that are going to build with insulated forms, which means it's like it has foam insulation, but it is also at the same time able to form concrete. So they're planning on doing all the walls out of insulated forms. And economically, we don't know where that's going to fall yet. Unfortunately, the price of construction post-fire has already like skyrocketed. I don't know what construction's like here, but minimum cost after this is going to be $600 a square foot, which for the rest of the nation is like exorbitant. A middle of the road house is probably pushing $900 a square. That's for like a very efficient house. Middle of the road house that was there before is pushing $900 a square foot. And that's without doing concrete. That's building back with wood framing, So yeah, architects are looking into it. It's just the realities of, are these things going to happen? I think all the intention is there for sure. It's just whether the money is there or whether the time is there to really kind of research and test these things out. Yes. And by the way, if you were there, I think you would believe in luck.
I was in California at the same time.
Oh, yeah?
I was in the San Bernardino mountains, so I was a little scared myself.
Okay. All right. Anybody else? I'll answer anything. No? Okay.
Hello. I was wondering if there is anything that Los Angeles architects have done in terms of political activism to change maybe the zoning codes or anything like that.
So it's funny. We're trying. I personally have not been involved with that yet. But you find that architects as an entity don't have that much power. Developers have a lot of power. Big constructions companies have a lot of power. So it's really about architects lobbying those institutions. And that's begun on like more of a grassroots level for sure. But I don't know, there's a development in the Palisades done by this guy named Rick Caruso. So he was running for mayor of Los Angeles the year before this. He's really conservative, but he's also a billionaire. And he built this thing in the Palisades, like an outdoor mall. Everything around it burned. His mall did not burn because he hired a private fire force to protect it while all the residences, thousands of residences around it were burning to the ground. You know, so, and he has already said he's either running for mayor or governor next term. If he runs for mayor, I think we have some chance to change zoning, but it will be in the guise of exclusivity and selling property at higher value and not, but it'll be framed in the fact that, oh, we're preventing fires, right? But that's not why they're doing it. I guess if it happens, we can't really complain. But yeah, if he becomes governor, I have no idea what's going to happen. It's going to affect the whole state. But yeah, it's been 8 months, but it feels like it was a week ago because not that much has actually happened, unfortunately.
One question from online. It kind of ties into Nate's and maybe Chris's as well. But so it's for Nicole Porter. She'll be arriving soon here. So she's probably watching from New Mexico. But so thank you, Chris, especially for weaving your first person narrative with a wider complex system of regulations, community, environmental, and economic issues. Her question is about perception and values. She says, I think you switched between referring to your house and your home. Could you please elaborate on how your relationship changed with this home, and if it changed?
Yeah, it's funny because I usually am. It's funny that you would pick that out, Nicole. Because I'm usually pretty intentional about referring to something as a home versus a house, and I don't know if that was just an accident during this lecture, but I think, once it didn't have anyone living in it, and all of our things are like, precious memories were essentially removed from it, it really just became a structure. Like we're going through the remediation process now, and I hate driving up there. It's like I have to go meet a insurance claim adjuster for 5 minutes who's going to give me less than I deserve. And at this point, it's actually it's a structure that's become a burden. When we have the good fortune of moving back in, I think it'll become a home again. My neighbors, for them, theirs is home. But for me, it's not going to be home until I have a neighborhood, to be quite honest. So there's other things, other components than just architecture that come into it. So, and that's why in some of the other projects I showed, we're talking more about the societal relationship or cultural relationship that architecture has with the city and not just the project itself. I don't know if I even answered her question. I got lost in it, but okay.
Any last questions? Oh, one.
Thanks, guys. I love this. There's usually never any questions.
So I kind of was curious about the city model, kind of ADU but not ADU one that you talked about. I just is there a way that we can go to that and look at it online or documents or something?
Yeah, so there's a site that was set up by the competition called Small Lots, Big Impacts. If you Google that, it actually has all of the competition entries, not just mine. So there's hundreds.
Okay.
And you can look through that. So not every team leveraged like state bills and assembly bills. But just like most of the things I talked about today, there's always a catch-22, right? So I actually have really good friends of mine who lived in the Palisades who lobbied fervently against a new state bill that allowed anyone to build a duplex on their single-family home. And these are people that are super liberal and pro-density in urban areas, but a little bit of the NIMBYism crept in And they moved to that neighborhood for a reason. It was disconnected from the hustle and bustle of LA. They could have a bigger lot. They could have a nice house with in a good school district where they could walk around. And then the state suddenly said, oh, no, we're going to allow everyone to build a duplex. So you're going to have more traffic congestion, more neighbors, more threat of fire, et cetera. Yeah, and weirdly, they lobbied against it. I can't really hold it against them, but just as I predicted for someone else's question, the reasoning they gave for it was complete BS. They said, oh, that's going to restrict fire lane egress. We already had such a problem of getting out of the neighborhood. Now you're telling us we're going to double our population. Like the fire lanes aren't set up for it. So then that bill was struck down for their district. But I know the reason that they did it was not really for those reasons.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it gets really complicated really quickly. Anyone else? All right, thank you guys. Appreciate it.